Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Luke and here on this channel I talk about perfumes, focusing on designer, vintage and affordable fragrances, as well as some niche here and there. So if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. In today's video, I want to share my opinion on buying vintage as opposed to modern formulations of vintage perfumes. I'll go through a couple of fragrances for which I purchased vintage formulations and take you through my thought process behind it. I'm not one to talk about the formulations all the time. I'm usually happy with the fragrances that are currently on the market, but there are some fragrances that I would only get in the vintage formula because I was incredibly disappointed when I tried the new formula. Which isn't to say that you should be too. If you like the new formula, well, good for you. I'm not telling anyone that they must buy the vintage formula of some particular fragrance because I find the modern to be not so good. So it's your decision and we can agree to disagree. But that's beside the point. Let's talk about some vintage fragrances that I prefer in their vintage formulation. I only own about 10 vintage bottles and they're all from the 90s and the early 2000s. And I must say that I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have been able to buy these at a good price. So the first one is Ysatis from Givenchy, and this is a 50 milliliter bottle of the eau de toilette from the early 90s, I believe. And it smells absolutely divine. It's so much better than the current formula, just in my opinion. If you like the current formula, good for you. The next one is Dolce Vita from Dior. This is also a vintage bottle from 1996, if I'm not mistaken. Dolce Vita is a sweet oriental scent. It's spicy, woody, fruity, absolutely stunning. I adore it, and it smells nothing like the current formula, which is terrible in my opinion. It was so weak and watered down when I tried it that I actually returned my bottle. This bottle is actually my second vintage bottle that I got on eBay. So if you're a fan of Dolce Vita, I highly recommend seeking out a vintage bottle. But if you're happy with the current formula, don't listen to me, wear it. Maybe I was a nosmic to it. Who knows? The next vintage bottle is my Dior Poison eau de toilette from the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. And I got this on eBay as well. It's absolutely divine. But is it that different from the current formula? No. I still like the current formula of Poison. And I'm happy to own this. And I think it's slightly better and richer than the current one. But I would still buy Poison new and not worry about it too much, to be honest. I also have a vintage bottle of Tuscany Perdona from Estee Lauder. I came across it by coincidence. I wasn't looking for it, but the price was amazing and I had to have it. Tuscany Perdona is another woody, fruity, floral scent from the 90s, and it smells like a cross between Samsara from Guerlain and Allure from Chanel. It smells sweet, vanillic, but it's also fresh and floral, and it's a really special scent. And I think that this is actually a bottle of the original, the very first formulation that was produced by Aramis, because a year later, Estee Lauder started producing it. So this is probably from 1993. Next up, I've got a bottle of Yvresse from Yves Saint Laurent, a vintage bottle from the 90s, but not the original formulation, because that one was called Champagne. This one was released a few years later, a few years after the name change, but it still comes in a cork-style bottle, which was later changed to all glass. And I believe this bottle is from 1996, if I deciphered the batch code correctly. And I got it new. It was sealed from eBay, and it was in perfect condition, beautifully preserved, and it smells incredible. The top notes are still intact because it was sealed in an airtight glass bottle inside a cardboard box. The lettering did rub off a little, but the scent didn't change. And I've tried the newest formulation of Yvresse as well. And while it's really nice, I like it, it's nowhere near as beautiful as the vintage, at least in my humble opinion. So I think I got really lucky with each one of these bottles, but I'm not sure I will buy any more for the moment because buying vintage always comes with a risk. Technically, you never know if a fragrance has expired or not. Typically, it hasn't, but you can never be certain. There are some people, I call them vintage snobs, who are very knowledgeable about vintage fragrances, but they're also equally pretentious. And they claim that every single vintage fragrance has been butchered by reformulation, and these people mainly thrive on the Fragrantica forums, where they shame others who might prefer modern over vintage formulations. And that's the reason why I don't contribute to the Fragrantica forums anymore. And these people will tell you that every single vintage perfume has been reformulated, ruined, and that you shouldn't buy it. There are many perfumes that are just as good, if not better, in their newer formulations. There are, of course, some fragrances that have been ruined, but I really think I can count them on the fingers of one hand. There's probably about 4 or 5 fragrances that I would consider ruined, and some of them are in this video, but I would never tell you not to buy the new formulations just because I have the vintage. That would be so incredibly selfish. Or if I don't have the vintage, I would never tell you not to buy the vintage if you personally feel like you need it. Because recommending something and telling someone to buy something are two entirely different things. Now, let's talk about some perfumes that I own in their current formulation. And I think that most modern formulations are just fine, apart from the very few that have been butchered, and I can count them on one hand, as I said. Most of them are satisfactory. We have to make do with what's available because seeking out overpriced vintage bottles on eBay isn't always an option. As I mentioned, I didn't overpay any of my vintage bottles. That was a few years ago, but now, the prices are up in the sky. If you want a vintage bottle of Ysatis or of Yvresse, you'll probably have to shell out hundreds of dollars, pounds, or euros just to get a bottle of a fragrance that could be expired. So why not buy something new? If you like it, buy it. So here I'm showing you a few bottles that I purchased new, and these are still vintage perfumes, but in their modern formulations. The first one is Chopard Casimir, and this is a beautiful peachy vanilla from the 90s. I've repurchased this one at least 3 or 4 times. The next one is Spellbound from Estee Lauder, and I do really love this. Do I want the vintage? Yes, but I'm really happy with this one, so I won't be looking for a vintage bottle just now. If I see one for a very good price, I might pick it up, but I'm not looking for a vintage bottle because this one is amazing. It's strong, it's potent, and to my nose, it smells great. And we also have Knowing from Estee Lauder, another Estee Lauder. You can tell that I love Estee Lauder, especially their classics. I love Estee Lauder classics. So Knowing is an 80s style chypre. It's very dry, floral, mossy, woody, musky. It's a beautiful chypre, and the newer formulation is just as stunning as the vintage. In my opinion, I don't feel the need to own a vintage bottle of Knowing because it's not a fragrance that I wear too much. I wear it from time to time. It's definitely not my favorite, but I like to have it in my collection because it's a classic chypre, and it's one of the best classic chypres. And I wear it more often than Cabochard, which is also a classic chypre, but that one has a cigarette smoke accord to it, which can be off-putting. And it's not something you would spray on, just like that, just as an everyday fragrance. It's way too opulent. And that one is also available in a new formulation from 2019, which is just as beautiful as the original, in my opinion. Of course, some people swear by the original. I'm happy with my 2019 formula. I also want to talk about dating vintage bottles and how you can figure out if you're buying a vintage bottle or not. Dating vintage bottles isn't always easy, but I just want to give you a few pointers that might help you with dating a particular bottle you might be interested in buying. So if your bottle is from a brand like Dior, Chanel, or YSL, be sure to check out the online blog Raiders of the Lost Scent. The information that I found on that blog was incredibly helpful. For example, if you're looking for a vintage bottle of Dior Poison or any other Dior, you have to look for a 5-digit batch code as opposed to a 4-digit one. You also want to make sure that all the information on the bottle is etched into the bottle, not part of a sticker. The tube has to be thicker and whiter than a typical modern tube, which is usually transparent. Dolce Vita also had a different box design back in the day. So those are just a few things that you have to look for. And I have a full review of vintage Dolce Vita, so check it out if you're interested. And there's some more information in a pinned comment under that video that will help you date a vintage bottle. But your first port of call should always be Raiders of the Lost Scent if you want reliable information on identifying vintage bottles of your Dior's, Chanel's, YSL's, and some other brands, I think. So I do hope you found this video helpful in some way. Do you buy vintage bottles often? Leave your thoughts down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video on Friday. Bye.